Welcome to Big 20, where GMs from all walks of life experience talk about gaming. Hosts this week are Pedro from World Walkers, Chad from Fear the Boot, and Chad, I got your other thing messed up.
Excellent.
It's Morning Sky.
Correct,
Morning Sky. And Nick from nicholascorey.com. This week we are talking about incorporating PC subplots. And let's start with some anecdotes or some stories about some silly PC subplots in your game. Anybody want to go first?
Real quick, I had one campaign I ran a couple years ago. I'm not going to go into detail about the setting, but it's a sci-fi setting set in the future of our solar system. And one of the players was playing like an exile from his culture. And I was like, oh, that'd be really cool at some point to have that obviously come up as something like he has to interact. And he called out specific non-player characters that he made up, in his backstory. So I was like, perfect, that'll work great. And so I laid the seeds for that, like maybe 3 or 4 sessions in, where they find someone who has to go back to the place that he's from. And as soon as I mentioned that place, he was like, nope, 100% not going there. I'm not dealing with that. He's like, I didn't make a lot of friends and we're not doing that. Like out of character, ending character, he was doing this. So I was just like, whoa, like what do I do now? And then the next maybe 4 or 5 sessions were me trying to figure out like, okay, how do I pull on these threads with him being so like against it early on? Yeah, that was fun.
So I had one in my current game. I had the last session of a campaign I was running for the past 6 months yesterday. So I am finally done and I get to be a player again. I'm very excited. I'm not like Pedro where I game master all the time. I like kind of have a
I was going to send my condolences, but it seems like you're happy about it.
Well, I mean, like I feel a need to, and I have something I really have to get out and express. And then when that's done, I really want to go back to play. And I ran 2 back to back, and now I really must be a player again. But no, we were playing Blades in the Dark, and one of my players, my wife actually, she's playing, they're all assassins. She's playing what's called a hunter, just kind of like a sniper. But her background is that she's very politically active. She's a rebel. She's a journalist kind of on the side, but with, sort of anarchist type newspapers and that sort of thing. And there was they're like trying to uncover some stuff. And there's another reporter, like I had a reporter in there. And I didn't even think anything of him. Like, this is just an off the fly. I need a guy. He's a reporter. Fine, whatever. Boom. I didn't have a name for him. And so he's in the middle of this situation, and he's like the cops are there, and he's kind of like, why are you doing this? And you're a dirty cop, and blah blah blah. And she's like kind of after the same plot thread going through it. And I'm like, so I'm describing this guy. I'm like, okay, he's there and he's yelling at the cop. And I kind of just offhand, like, he's really handsome and well dressed and blah, blah, blah. And just kind of going through like a totally made up NPC. And she's like, well, handsome? How handsome? Because this guy is already like in her wheelhouse, right? Like, he's a journalist. He's going after the man. He's standing up for the little guy sort of thing. I'm totally unplanned on my part. And I'm like, I don't know. And I pick up a D6, roll it, 6. I'm like, he's the most attractive man you've ever seen in your life. And she's like, really? And so half the game was pretty much her trying to get with him and him not noticing her. And there was this whole thing where he had some information. And so she's like, well, I tell you what, I will question my source, telling this to the team. Well, her source is this super hot journalist that she's trying to get. And so she's like, well, why don't we meet in a coffee shop downtown and exchange notes? And he's like, oh yes, we'll go after him. We'll get him. Yes, we'll get them. Yes. And so it's like, from his point of view, it's like they're exchanging the plot information. From her point of view, it's a date. and he just doesn't know it yet. And one of the other players is like kind of understanding of all of this. And so she's a slide, it's called. So she dresses up as a barista, like disguises herself to the point to where my wife character does not recognize her own partner. And she is a barista. She's like serving them and stuff to make sure my wife actually gets the information. And so she's like trying to sabotage the date. And it was this whole session of like trying to get the plot out, trying to have a date, trying to sabotage the date. It was amazing. It was glorious.
I think for me, off the top of my head, in the current podcast I'm doing, World Walkers, my wife plays a character named Hopscotch, and she specifically did not want to have a backstory. That was her whole thing. It's like, I don't want to have to keep track of stuff. So she plays Hopscotch is just a folk hero, and that's it. There's no explanation for why. The lack of backstory has created so many scenarios where there's actually way more backstory, because like her excuse whenever she wants to do something is like, well, I'm a goddamn folk hero. And so then I have to come up with backstory on the fly that kind of fills this vacuum in. And so it'll be like, well, you meet this guy and it's like, well, I want a discount. Well, why would they get a discount? I'm a fucking folk hero. And then we got to make a roll. And then I got to come up with a reason why this person's like they met this like crazy old, like oil baron styled shopkeep. And is like, I want this item and I want a discount. Why? It's like, well, I'm a fucking folk hero. She rolls. Come to find out, he had stayed at her inn years ago. He's like, is that Hopscotch? And then like, so like she has no background, no backstory. And because of that, it's this black hole of backstory. It's like, I have to have all these notes now of all the backstory she doesn't have.
Yeah.
No backstory is the same as all of the backstory. So like,
that's it. Yeah.
Have you thought of like punishing her with her own backstory? Like,
no.
Well, I mean, did your wife? You gotta. They'll still be there after the game is over, but
right.
Yeah, I mean that. But if that was not the case, that would be one thing you could do, is just say, "Oh, you're Hopscotch. I remember you. You're the one who saved that one orphanage."
Right.
Even though you set the orphanage on fire trying to save her and killed 40 kids.
Yeah, the name of our podcast keeps me from doing that. It's World Walkers. They're never in the same spot. Like, I can't. So.
How can you be a folk hero if you're like sliders and jumping?
We're gonna find. They're finally off world from her original world. So we'll see what happens if she pulls this off or not. Yeah,
I can absolutely tell you what is going to happen. I know what's going to happen. She's going to look right at you and you're going to say, well, okay, this guard is guarding the door and he's not letting you through. Well, I tell him to open the door for me because I'm a goddamn folk hero. And she is going to look at you with that look where you're going to have to come up with a reason why this guy on planet X knows who she is.
Well, luckily we switched away from D&D for this game, so that background is where she got it from, and that doesn't help anymore. Sure. It's a trait of that background, is that you're a folk hero. So
you're saying this like that's gonna matter.
We had this argument where she's like, "You'd better not fucking kill me," and I was like, "I won't." And we have this understanding. It's more of an argument, I guess, but we do have it. I've made myself clear that no one's safe. Like,
yeah, right.
So no, she knows. Like, it's not going to go well. Yeah.
You keep telling yourself that.
I have. We've already had. We've had moments where I've been like. I put a lot of music in the podcast, so you can tell like when it gets serious for a second, like the music literally stops. We have this. I have to make it clear, yeah. But I mean, it's all in good fun. So, but yeah, the lack of backstory has added way more backstory because that kind of like fluidity can follow her in a way that some of the other ones, like someone has a flower shop. Yeah, well, she doesn't run the flower shop anymore. So rarely do we have a petunia discussion come up. But that what we thought would be no complications has added way more on the go. So
I had a player like that. It was Pat from the podcast, and he didn't really do deep backgrounds. He kind of played tropes that he liked, and he had a small list of them. He played them very well. It's kind of like a character actor, he played them extremely well, but there were only a couple of them. And this game I ran for him, he did not have any kind of background. Like, part of the game was you make your character, and your character represents an entire aspect of the world. So you define what the world is like. And he really didn't. So, I mean, which was fine, because I just filled in the blanks for him. But from that was one of the really a deep moment in role playing that really strikes me, because he was this evil guy. It was an evil campaign where everyone was playing back as like D&D. And he was like this sort of immortal, mage spellcaster type thing from this leadership of spellcasters who were immortal, and they had like a cult, and their whole thing was that when they died, they go into the spirit realm, and then the people who are left behind, their family, would get their cult to say, okay, if you sacrifice yourself, we will bring one of the family forward, they will take over your body, and you will join us in the spiritual realm. Eventually you'll come back, 1,000 years later, which is a complete lie. Their spirit is totally annihilated, and they take over the body, and everyone thinks it's great. They're really, really evil. And they're not nice people. But they were faced with this sort of bad guy who was not like mustache twirling evil and that you just kill for hit points. It was like questioning his entire way of life. Well, the party had been on these adventures together, and they were all bad guys, and they were all very violent and evil, but they were in it together. The sort of brothers in arms sort of thing. They had really come together and gelled very well. And, he had no background, didn't make any. He all that stuff I just talked about, I made for him, and that was about it. And this bad guy was kind of like doing this. Well, why don't you join me in my evil? Because we're both evil, and screw the other guys. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. He's like, well, how many friends do you have? Really? How many friends? How many people do you know that in your life? And he just kind of stops, and there were two other players in the group. And he looks at both of the players. He goes, 2. And it like really struck me, because it really set up how close the story of the characters were, that they had come together, and it really defined this character, that he was evil and had no one, yet he found these 2 people. Now, the reality of it is that he didn't have a fucking background. Yeah. So he didn't have any friends or family or anything. Yeah. Because that was the actual answer. But it made a really neat answer. It's this really poignant moment in a very brutal, evil campaign.
So something I wanted to ask is, when you all have players make their backgrounds, like, what's your approach? Do you like throw them to the narrative wolves and let them do whatever they want to? Do you give them the premise of your game and ask them to tie it all together somewhere in between? Like, what is your approach to PC backgrounds? Like their backstories before a game starts, or even, what I'm really interested in is, do you have a different approach when the game's already going? Like, where do you go with that?
Well, for me, I really, I make sure that they're at least kind of aware of the setting to some degree, somewhat familiar with it. And then I always tell them, like, feel free to write as much or as little as you want. But usually all I ask for is, like, name an NPC, or come up with one person who's not a player that you have a connection to, and why you started adventuring in the first place. Those are pretty much the 2 things that I require. And then anything beyond that is totally on the part of the player, if they want to bring it or not. And in the last X amount of years, like, I've had players that go all over the board. I started with groups that only would give me like the name of an NPC, and now I have players in groups that give me pages and pages. And I always tell them like I may use some of this, I may not use any of it. I may use a lot of one person's and not a lot of another's. It's not it's not a preference thing. It's just how it fits into the plot that we're doing or the narrative that we're doing. But also part of it too is like I very much, when I start a campaign, I poll my players and I ask them like, what sort of campaign do you want to do? Like, here's 3 or 4 ideas that I have, and then you guys tell me which one sounds best, and then whichever one gets the most votes or whichever one they sound like they're the most into, that's what I go with. So they already have a level of buy-in before we even do our session 0, because they know that this is the plot that we picked and this is what we're going to do because we're all somewhat interested in that. So yeah, that's basically how I do it. I like to have more information available to the players before we even start, because I feel like it goes a little smoother that way.
For me, it's different every time. When I run games, pardon me. When I run games, I really try to do something different. I try to run a different kind of game. I try to have different themes. I don't like running the same thing again and again, be it rules or stories or characters or whatever. And even my approach tends to be different each time. But like what I did I ran this 5th edition game that I ran for a year, a little bit longer than a year, which was previous to this Blades in the Dark one. What I did was, I said, well, okay, we're all playing 5th edition D&D characters, whatever. And I said, whatever races you don't pick, these do not exist in the world.
Oh, interesting.
Just to kind of change it up a little bit. And then later on, I actually inverted that. I made that not true, and made that a major plot point. But what they did was we kind of made characters. I said, we are not going to roll up your characters first. We kind of have an idea of what we want, but we're not going to roll dice, put pen to paper. We're going to roll up an NPC first. And this NPC is the king of the land. So you're going to make him. And I put a single character sheet out in the middle of the table. And I said, make him like he's a level 1 character, go. And they made everything. And then as they were making him, I would throw out questions because at first they thought they were fucking with me. Because oh, we're just going to make a gnome bard and that's going to be the king. I'm like, then I started asking questions. How did a gnome bard become king? And I would define things as I did that. How did a gnome bard become king of an all human empire? Now, they didn't know it was a human empire. I did not know it was a human empire. I'm making all this stuff up on the fly. But it kind of makes her a pointed question that makes them stop and think. It's like, oh, yeah, ha, gnome bard, really funny. Well, wait a minute. How did a gnome bard become king of all these humans? Well, what are gnomes good at? Well, they're really good at illusions. He's pretending to be human. And I'd sit there and go, how did that happen? And then we just kept making the character and making the character and making the character that made this sort of world. And then it defined the people who was attached to this gnome king.
Sure.
The characters became in love with the gnome king because it was he is their character. They made him. And he is central to the story and the plot line. And he's also a lovable character too. They made NPCs that were kind of ancillary to that. And then I said, you are the children of these NPCs. And these NPCs took over a land from an evil lick and cleared out the evil, but they were like super god tier. They're like 20th level, super high level, and wanted to retire. They want to retire and have a kingdom and just run a kingdom. But you're their heirs and you're 19 years old. All right, let's make characters now. And then so we made characters from that. And then it was really easy because one of the consistent things I like to do for backgrounds is you have to be tied to the other players. I don't want strangers. I hate strangers. because it's a lot of wasted time. It's role play. You walk into a tavern and there's somebody you don't know who looks interesting, and you have a conversation for no reason with them.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, it's great though. When you're already connected, then you go from there. You don't waste your time with all that, useless RPG, which is really odd for me to say that there is such a thing as useless RPG, but there is, at least for me.
See, that backfired for me. I have previously had that suggestion / rule of like, you really should tie yourself into the other characters in some way. And what I found out was, in one of the games I run, it's like a steam powered fantasy game, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a gunslinger who has a different name in every city. He has a big reputation. And they're all stupid names like Tripod and Big Juice. But so one of the players, when his
Flex Press.
Yeah, I mean, like when his character died and he made a new character, he's like, I'm going to play someone who is tied to this character, to Big Juice. This is going to be awesome.
Big Juice.
Yeah. He's got a lot of dumb names.
No, they're fantastic names.
They are. They're fantastic, but for the wrong. Yeah, he makes time in every city is his idea. And so the idea is that he tied his character to this person. Now, without going too much into all the backstory, on that world there are gunslingers, and gunslingers live by a code. And
so like the Dark Tower.
Yeah, very much influenced by that. And if you break the rules, the gunslingers come and find you. You're considered broken, and they will execute you. Mm-hmm. And so when he had to decide whether he was going to execute someone who broke the rules, and he wouldn't do it. So he's like, I know that my time is limited. I know that the gunslingers are going to come to me. I'm going to go to my master and turn myself in. And the other player's like, I'm sorry? Like, yeah, I'm going to go turn myself in. He's like, cool. Fuck. And he, obviously you can do whatever you want. Any character can always do whatever they want to, but he felt like to stay true to his character, he had to leave with Big Juice.
Mm-hmm.
The halfling gunslinger.
Yeah.
Because he's like, well, this is my idol. I'm going to go with them. I got to stick with them. That's my whole point. And so when this player, and the storyline was cool, he was like, I'm not, like, basically, if anyone is found in possession of a firearm that's taken from a gunslinger, they have to be executed immediately. And they had found out that a traveling companion of theirs had secretly been holding onto a firearm. He won in a game of chance.
Oh.
And he wouldn't do it. And it's an NPC it's been in multiple games that we've run.
Sure.
So he's like, God, this guy's iconic. I can't do it. Because of that, he left. He's like, I gotta send my character off. I'll make a new character. And then the other players at the table, and he literally just looks and goes, fuck. So, I mean, this was stupid. And since then, we have rethought whether or not people should tie themselves to each other or to the plot. Because now they tie themselves to the plot and can have intermingles, but that's the idea is, we've been rethinking it.
Sure.
But it looks like there's a question in the chat. It's Gaming with Gage says, how do you keep PC subplots from derailing the game? Oh, great question. I don't, apparently. Everything fucks me up. No, but
that's an easy one with Gage. I mean, you just don't play Savage Worlds. It's simple as that.
I'm just starting Savage Worlds, so I had played it before, but So what do you mean by that?
Well, he's a podcaster and he loves his Savage Worlds. I love giving him crap about it, but no, Savage Worlds is cool. Gage is an awesome guy. My thing, how do you keep PC subplots from derailing your game? You don't. They're your PCs. Their stuff is going to be way more interesting than your stuff. The only way it derails it is if it steals spotlight from the other PCs. If it is sucking the air out of the room, then that's the derailment. If people are getting bored with this one person's plot, that's the bad thing. Your plot, the game master, your plot is on plot time. It's not on an actual timer. So you just freeze time and go with them to have fun. There's always going to be limits to that. I mean, are you going to just faff about and never actually do anything ever for the next 6 months? Sure. But that really does get back into, is everybody having fun with this? Then how is it a derailment?
See, I think I have a player who would challenge you on that without meaning to. I have some players in the past anyway. I don't have them anymore, but I have some players who, like, when they get the spotlight, they will just soar a bit. Like, I think that's true for 90. I mean, we're crossing the border between like problem player versus and that's not. So I'm not saying it's but I have had players who they'll make everything about them, and then they'll take the story and they're like, look, at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to deal with this kingdom. They're going to do what they're going to do. Yeah, we got to find my dad.
Right.
I mean, but everybody else signed up for the kingdom, and no one cares if you're an orphan. Like,
yeah.
But that's more of a problem player than it's an exception to the rule. But
well, and also, I mean, since you're the game master, it's your job to deliver the world, and if there is too much time spent on a subplot of a player's, and again, that really does not gel with my thinking on how games run, because it's not the player's subplot, it's our subplot. My plot is the group's story. We're telling the story together. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the writer. I'm not the writer who's balancing the different plot threads to make a well-constructed story here. I am along for the journey. I'm here to deliver the world. I'm here to keep things rolling and going. I get that there can be dozens of different things. Like, if one character or player is getting too much focus, there's all different kind of problems along that road. Mm-hmm. But you have to read the room, I guess.
Yeah. What do you think, Nick?
Like, how do you, how do you prevent a one-player subplot from derailing? So I tend to run more narratively structured games, like, from the outset, and that's just because the players that I play with, most of the time, that's what they prefer. Like, I have posited, usually when I give them 3 or 4 different campaign pitches, half of them are, more player driven and half of them are more GM driven, and they always go for the GM driven stuff. So how do I, like, the one thing that I kind of keep as far as reminding players, like, not to derail the game, is that the GM is kind of in charge of the length of scenes, and the GM can really determine when a scene starts and when one stops, and what the context of the start and stop are. And that's something that I've really kind of been trying to develop a little bit better in my more recent campaigns, is like, okay, this seems like a great stopping point for this scene. So even though, like, he might have just asked this other person a question and we're currently waiting for an answer, so to speak, I'll just be like, all right, now we're going to cut to the next scene. Now we're going to move on from here. And reminding myself that I have the ability to do that is a good way to prevent PC subplots from derailing.
It's the rule that I use. I call it the San Dimas rule. It's based off Bill and Ted. The clock in San Dimas is always running. Mm-hmm. I let the story kind of go where it needs to, but it's that spinning plate idea that some game designers have talked about, where, like, things are still happening. It's as much a living world as possible. So, like, typically the players will sometimes get distracted, and then I'll introduce, like, a consequence from not moving forward.
Right.
The group tends to figure out, like, oh, they're starting the executions.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the things that you can do, other than having the world react to create the plot to move forward here, is have the players self-regulate. When a player subplot happens, don't have it happen in a vacuum with just the one player. Mm-hmm. Involve the other players. Even if they're not involved, the group, these characters are ostensibly supposed to be friends or comrades or allies or temporary truce, or they have a connection. And so that means they have an opinion. And the role play happens when all these different opinions and views collide, either positively or negatively. So what you have one player with one subplot talking to their long lost mother, whatever. Any way you can, get some other players, get their characters involved in that as soon as possible. I guarantee you this will self-regulate because,
I was just going to say, I think a good way to do that, and something that I try to do on occasion, is have one player's subplot be introduced and affect only other players to start with. So like if one player has like a villain or something or a nemesis, maybe that character, that NPC, has heard that their nemesis is traveling with these other people. And so they find a place when they can get at those other people away from the player character that's directly connected to them. And then that creates a level of tension, between those characters who aren't even connected to that NPC. And now suddenly there's a connection there. And then they have a reason to then confront the other PC about it. And it just introduces new layers.
That is a phenomenal way to go. I had that exact thing happen. I had a player or character, whose subplot was he thought his mother was dead. She was not dead. A different character encountered the mother, had a intense RP scene with them, convinced the mother to go. And we had months of in-game time, and that PC never revealed it until this PC, the mother came back, and this PC was like, there was something I need to tell you. And oh my God, that was great. Yeah. Wow, that was some great role play because there's something I have to tell you. I met your mother 3 months ago and didn't tell you, was said in front of everyone. And oh my God, you better believe everybody had a damn opinion about that.
Right.
And that's a subplot that had literally nothing to do with my meager plot. And it just drove everything. It was neat. It was really cool.
See, I had a character who come in with his own subplot. His subplot was that he was struggling with the relationship with his mother. The reason is that his mother died and threw her soul into his body. And so half the time his character was very timid. And half the time his character was like evil and twisted and would do terrible things. And I just want to make sure that there might be a chance that some of you are listening to this and go like, whoa, it's fucking terrible. We hated that story. It totally soaked up every scene because like he would do terrible, evil things and be like, hey, sorry, it's his mom now. I'm playing her. Oh my God, he would derail so many stories, and it wasn't like it didn't feel like we were ever exploring his story.
Yeah,
it was just a coin toss whether he was like Harvey Dent or fucking Two-Face.
Right,
and those things are like really big problematic things where it's like, look, I understand what you're doing, but if you keep taking that, like sometimes that's what's like hard is that sometimes you just have to tell people like, I don't know if everyone's having the same level of fun as you're having.
Right,
and it's no fun to be confrontational sometimes, but sometimes you have to just for other people. Like the other people at your table don't want to be the GM for a reason.
This absolutely, gets back to, this is one of those examples where that subplot, that character's too intense, great character, too intense. That sucks the air out of the room. I could see, because I had an NPC like that in this D&D campaign where she was a 5th edition warlock, super high level, deal with the devil possessed her, and they kind of had a detente in the body that was kind of driving them both insane. And I role played her for a couple of sessions, and then I had to make the decision to, okay, she's just going to exit now because it's too intense. And when she shows up, it's not about them or the story, it's about her. And the players and the PCs trying to wrap their heads around her. So
and that's what was hard about this is that like maybe on paper the story sounds interesting, but nobody wanted to play with the little kid who was timid and terrible, and nobody wanted to play with his mom. So
Hey guys, Van City Dustin wants to know how do you maintain balance between PC subplots? Now I'm going to add a little bit to it, assuming that they're not already connected. What if they're conflicting subplots?
Touch on one a session and don't go more than that. I think that's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Treat it like a television show with a B plot, and every television show has a different B plot. And even though the B plots may string from one episode to another, you still, this episode where the B plot is this, and then next episode is the next one. So
I think it helps too to like, one of the best like things I think any GM can do is to constantly read the room, because if a subplot hits and people like it, and then kind of feed that in a little bit more. But sometimes if like it's not hitting, it's okay to, like you're saying, like shelve it for a minute, figure another angle out at it, something. Like sometimes like the best answer is sometimes just improving it. And like I feel like you can never be afraid to take notes in the middle of something. Like someone's talking, and is the moment somebody like a player starts talking, you're like, cool, thank you so much. I gotta write this down. Oh my god, and they like the guard. The guard doesn't even have a fucking like. Just, like writing down the notes as you go. That way, you can respond real fast, because you might not have the answer ahead of time, but if you watch it and everyone's like, "Oh, cool, that guy used to be a farmer," and you're like.
He is now.
Berry Fields. I loved Final Fantasy 11. I guess that's where we're going with this. Like,
I think part of this is actually not really actually GM advice. It's player advice. Not characters. Characters have to be consistent, and characters have to have defined goals and do all this stuff. Players need to understand that the game has to go forward, and that there should be conflict between the players that makes for great role playing, but there cannot be eternal conflict. You know, a player has to give in. If a player A wants to go left and player B wants to go right, and there is an argument about it in character, that's great. That's called role play. If there is this argument about that for 3 solid sessions, that's no longer role play. That's just wank.
Yeah.
And one or the other has to change their character. They actually have to cede the fight, and because there's never going to be any winner. And that's a player thing. The game master could come in and say, "Okay, player B, I get it, but you're going left." That's stupid. That's bad.
It's very hard when players have just happened to have not made characters, but just like player avatars.
Oh yeah,
right.
We had that in one of the podcasts I do, where like the argument was so intense and it took so long and got so nowhere that I actually cut out literally like an hour, maybe hour and 20 from that episode. We lost it. It'll never be heard. It's gross and violent because they weren't playing their characters. They actually all kind of were running avatars of themselves. And sometimes like knowing that difference, like as the GM, knowing when people are playing their characters and when they're like, I just wish you wouldn't drink at the table. It's like, oh no.
Oh crap. We're doing an intervention? I don't have rules for that.
But no, like, yeah, it's, and I think that like that goes to the idea, like if your table tends to not play characters, but kind of play more themselves, which is awesome and totally legit, then it lets you know when maybe you should step in faster. Because when those arguments are happening, they might not be amazingly deep.
And like you say, you have to read the room. You have to read the room in sort of a long play too. If you have an entire room of, like you said, not characters but avatars, then that means as a game master, you can't throw the hardball stuff at them because you know that they're going to be, if they're dealing with like dark stuff as people in your game, then you know maybe that causes tension. And now we're talking about tension between people, not tension in Fantasyland here. And I had a group where there were like a couple of people who ran avatars and everybody else ran characters. And that's tense. That's hard because they want a meaty role-playing game, and you give them that meat, and then they start tearing into it, and everybody's getting into it. So I got my characters who are really intense. I got my my avatar people are really intense. And then I kind of like, it keeps going. And then I'm like, wait, is your character angry or are you angry? Because now we're yelling.
Yeah.
And if it's your character that's angry, just shh, a little bit.
Well, and I think if I can, I'll throw myself under the bus on this. Something that I try to make sure. I don't know if anyone else has ever done this. I have done it in the past. Sometimes, I have done this like in the past where sometimes role playing starts going, and there's like a little piece of me that in the past was like, cool, less of my prep I've got to burn, and like. You just kind of sit back and let them go, and then they start going too far because you're like, oh, cool, this is role play, and I might not have to use this encounter tonight. And then if you can't take advantage of the role play, because no matter how good anyone is, eventually that tank will start to run out, and you don't want players to run on fumes because they're awesome. They're going to keep thinking of ways to keep it meaty, and then eventually they might hit a nerve. Like,
right.
So, yeah. It's no fun to admit that out loud. And I don't do it anymore, but I have totally done that in the past where like I was like, one of my pre-podcast time I did that.
Sure, yeah. One of the groups that I run regularly, it's every couple months. It's my real life friends that I grew up with that we've since moved away, and every few months we get back together and play. They're very much in the avatar group. They just play a character. Like they don't role play too much. And that's something that like they don't tabletop role play away from me. Like when they're off doing their own thing in the months that we're apart, they just play video games and stuff. But I do tabletop role playing all the time. Like I do it online a bunch. I do it with my daughter. And so then I've kind of, I don't want to say I grew past that, but I adopted a different style of play that I preferred. And after our first like mini campaign, when we were first trying D&D 5th edition, and I saw how they were interacting with the game, I eventually went like, okay, guys, like I want to keep running this because I love playing with you guys, and I want to do a full campaign, but I need you guys to interact with the world in some way that isn't just swinging your swords. Like I need that, and that's something I had to remind them is that like I know I accepted the mantle, or I came to you guys saying I want to run a game for you because I want to present you guys with a campaign that's going to be fun for you, but at a certain point I have to go, it has to be fun for me too. Because if I'm just sitting here going like, all right, we'll do combat again, like, ooh, that's not great. And then I kind of wish that we would just play a board game or something.
But I don't know if you saw it, like that is the mantle of the DM in 5th edition. They specifically said the game's not about whether the GM has fun. It's about whether the players have fun, and the GM is there to allow them to have X amount of fun. The GM cannot add to the amount of fun that a player or players can have. They can only cap the amount of fun that is allowed at the table. That's Mike Merrill's. I have opinions.
Yeah,
he has opinions. He's wrong. So,
I just, when you told that story, I was like, oh no.
Well, and
Nick is anti-Merrill's, doesn't know.
I will always say that the player's fun is more important than my.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
But I also think that I can't give them a fun game unless I too am also invested in it.
Yes, yeah.
And part of being invested in it is getting the things from an RPG that I want to get from an RPG. And sometimes, so
you're saying
often,
the DM matters. Again, I'm flipping to the book right now, and I just don't know if I'm going to find that in the writing.
There's a whole book devoted to the DM. Of course, they matter. Like
it's a guide on how to run their game. You're right.
Right. Yeah. Their money matters. That's for sure.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
That's why they focus on the campaign guides so that you can, that anyone could run it. It doesn't need to be Nick.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, it's just, I'm not bitter, I guess I'm trying to say.
No, that is it's a weird stance to take, like for their official product. Like it's weird to go that hard, because I do think that everybody's enjoyment, like there is value in everybody's enjoyment.
Well, without going too far, I don't want to get into too much of the brand and so like that, but like
sure.
They did say, like they said that like when they moved from 4th to 5th, they knew that their answers to save the brand, to save the game, were hook into the streaming audience and give the game back to the players.
Well,
those were the two guiding.
I can't argue with those points. Those are good points.
I think they went too far on the "I don't matter" and maybe I should be,
But then again, they also say, like right away in the player's handbook, that everything in those books are guidelines, and you are free to use
and that is their
adapt.
cop out. I hate because I feel like that's the same thing as like me telling my daughter, "Hey, if you want to do it." I think that you know what? Go ahead and mark up your Barbies. Because it's one of those hey, it's a Pontius Pilate shit where it's like you're wiping your hands. Like there's other games who do it so much better. They explain
sure, yes,
here we've got the DM's back when it comes to here, and here's what we advise you to do. Whereas like D&D 5th edition especially has that one rule of like, at the end of the day, it's you, and then you've got to constantly defend yourself against players who are like, it says here in the book. And it's like, well, remember page 3 and nowhere else it said that I can do what I want if you let me.
See, I luck out because I can always just go, especially with my real life players. I can be like, you know what? You guys run the game. I will happily play in your game if you want to have heat metal work that way.
I don't have that buff. I hate playing. So like, fine. Why don't I play then?
Sure.
Fuck. But yeah.
It really surprises me though that they have that kind of language in the books in this day and age when we have all this narrative role-playing game stuff. It's like we have all of this, cooperative world building, but we're taking one person and we're saying, no, it's about them world building. It's about
that's what they made sure not to put in the book that way.
Yeah.
yeah. It's only on Twitter that you find the hot takes. But I digress. But so something else like how much of do you ever worry about taking too much of a player's subplot or backstory? Have you ever, or maybe this is a better way to answer it because the answer can be like, no, I don't. Has there been an instance where you went too far in and you were like, oh no, like what's a mistake that you might have made that would be a good piece of advice through throwing yourself under the bus like I did earlier?
I think I go the opposite direction because I
never mistake.
No.
It's my curse.
I don't take enough, I guess is what I'm saying.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I improv a lot. And so when players give me stuff, I farm ideas. I rip them off wholesale and then incorporate all that into my game. But then conversely, I ignore a lot of what they have because I don't care. It's their character. It's not my character. And I tell my players that all the time. When they look at me, it's like, oh, should I roll this or can I do this? I'm like, I don't care. But you do. It's your character. It's not my character. Sure. I mean, I'm not quite an asshole like that all the time. But yeah, that's my attitude on it. It is like, oh, did my character have 5 arrows? I'm like, I don't know. He had 100. Who cares?
Yeah.
What do you?
I do that for everything but bullets.
I especially do. Track them. Yeah, I track their weight. We do encumbrance on bullets.
Jeez.
We do for Pathfinder because it's so simple. But
I played a video game called Stalker where they weighted everything, including bullets. Individual bullets had a weight, and you would slow down to where you could barely move, and a monster's coming at you, and you'd be like, oh, hey, I can run now. I fired 5 rounds off.
See, isn't that just called Death Stranding?
I mean, maybe.
I could take everything you hate about encumbrance and get rid of the rest.
Yeah. It has been my one of my like bucket list things for role playing to run a game set in the Roadside Picnic / Stalker universe. I love those games.
I've read the books. I've played the games. I've watched the movie. Yeah,
the movie's great. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. But every time I pitch it to my players, they're like, "That sounds a little too like hardcore, gritty realism."
I know. Do you live in St. Louis? Because I'm totally down.
No, I live in Minnesota.
Too cold.
Have to do it online. I know, right? I'm like rubbing my feet together right now.
So we need to change places then. My players want me to run like a really gritty. I have, of the different worlds I run, one of them is just like this really gritty survival hellscape. And they're like, when are you going to run that? I'm like, No. You'll hate me. It's not. It sounds cool. It's like jumping out of an airplane. It's all good till the pilots, like, till they're shouting at you, like, if you don't go now, we're gonna have to shove you. Like, you paid $3,000. Like, it sounds cool.
I know, man. Eric and I are in a post-apocalyptic, post-nuke game, and it's pretty good, and it's brutal. You know, Skies of Glass. It is. It's one of those games where there's combat in it, and it's a rules light system, and the combat is so brutal. It's like, okay, there's our buddy. The bad guys are going to kill him, and they're going to eat him. We have to stop him. It's like, if I get shot, my character will be so maimed as to be nearly unplayable. I think we're going to leave him.
Right.
But that sounds brutal. It is, but actually it makes it to where combat in real life, nobody picks up a broadsword and charges an orc. You know, that's stupid.
I haven't found an orc yet. So
yeah, orcs don't exist, but if they did, that would be pretty dumb. And you have to have like reasons and motivations to
get all that weight off with your bullets. Like,
right. Yeah, I know.
I don't have time to broadsword. I got to dump some shells.
Yeah. But that's the neat thing about the game, is that because the combat is both light, rules light, and absolutely brutal, you have to think about those motivations of, why am I risking myself and my friends with violence? Why am I doing that? Yeah. What is the cost benefit analysis of that?
Right. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows what they're getting into when they step into a game like that too. Like, it's not like, you know, like I worked really long time on my backstory, I can't lose this character. Like, everyone signed up for this. So then I don't play.
Eric had a character that lasted 2 games.
So I've never played a game like that. Where does this conversation about backstory fit into something like that? Do players tend to make big, giant backstories? Do you take those into account? Do you add in their subplots when all this crazy stuff is going on? Like, I don't actually know. Eric
made an excellent character. All right, and this does actually tie into the whole backstory thing. Eric made an excellent character. It was a neat character. It was deep. It was very much entwined with the story. It was entwined with various NPCs. It was entwined with aspects of the story that we had only tangentially touched on. So there was like a real good, fresh sort of take to it. Game 1, we were like, you know, developing our relationship with him. We were, you know, establishing him in the party, you know, doing all that stuff where you get with a new character into an established party. And then Game 2, halfway through the game, his character found not legitimate, but plot reasons, motivations to end his life. I mean, it's horrible. Suicide should never be reasonable, and it wasn't. But
and yet Eric,
and he did it. And
Eric.
I do not consider that taking backstory and subplot, which he had subplots,
right,
and all of that, and throwing it away. Yeah. It was just an ultimate expression of that, tragic and horrible that it was.
Well, and the awkward part was the table was so excited; they all cheered, and it was just
like,
that's also different because that's
two whole
like
games with this asshole.
But that's like a narrative, like a satisfactory narrative resolution to that backstory. It's not like roll initiative, first hit, crit on Eric. Oh, now he's dead. Sorry, roll up a new character. You know what I mean? Like that to me is the end of his arc, not like suddenly we have to come up with an end to his arc because he ended, you know?
Yeah.
So I was going to throw a story out real quick too, because it goes with the backstory thing. I feel like we had something of a pseudo opposite, where we had a story where, the backstory was basically there's a dungeon and it lands on a world and it attracts adventurers for the sole purpose of getting enough like death in it to rip the world in half and jump to the next one, right? As a whole thing with it. But the idea is that, it is actually literally a living dungeon.
That's cool.
And so it embeds itself into this world. The players get together, and one person's backstory is, this is my family heirloom weapon, because Dragon Magazine had level up your weapon as an issue. And there's super fun rules, and he was like, I'll never lose this weapon. So the rule is that the creatures that are trapped inside the dungeon can never help. They're bound. They can never. So they get to this one level. They fight a were-tiger, and the whole area is because it's like dimensional. So like they're fighting in the plains. It's using the tall grass to move and stuff like that. When the fight ends, right before it ends, he disarms and takes the weapon from that character. The fight ends, and he says, I want my weapon back. And the were-tiger has to tell him, like, I cannot help you. I'll never be able to. This is, if you want, you have to re-challenge me, and then that'll seal the dungeon level off. And that player was their best character in the game. Like, power-wise, he gave so much to the group, decided to walk out and end his life in a gelatinous cube nearby because his backstory was that important. And sure, kudos to sticking to your guns, but the group was really... I used to do things called summer campaigns. The group can play as many times during the summer when they're back from college. And if they don't finish in time, that's the end of the game.
Oh, sure. So
they were like, you can't stick to your backstory this time. And he was like, so that was a time the backstory got in the way. Yeah, it was bad. Well, they couldn't. Like, so yeah, backstories are fun.
Yeah.
That's my takeaway.
So final question of the night is an AMA question. What's your favorite gamer food at the table?
Anything I make, because I'm a damn good cook.
I can't eat the table, so it doesn't matter.
My group is fond of Oreo Thins. Because they don't get anything on your fingers, and they're surprisingly delightful. Like, you're like, it's less Oreo. Why would it be good? But they're great.
If we're asking what the group likes, our running joke is somebody was making fun of Snapple one game, and they're like, "Oh, dude, that's bitch juice." And now, and then there was a person next to him that was like, I'm fucking attacked. And it was like, oh shit, you're drinking Snapple. Like, so that's probably our unofficial drink of the table, at least, is bitch juice.
I have a tradition with one of my players where we, at the beginning of the game, before we even start, we make coffee, and we make coffee and bourbon. So we've already gone through an entire bottle of bourbon, and we just put like a bit of it in coffee. But yeah, that's what I like.
That's one way to do it.
All right, so we're just about finished with this episode. Do any of you guys have any final thoughts before we wrap?
Backstories are super fun. Players will come up with wildly creative things, and even if there doesn't seem like there's a lot of meat on the bone, if you just spice it a little bit, you'll find players who, the first time they join, they don't really do much. And then the second time, third time they join, they're like, oh, I can't wait to share my backstory with you. And you're like, what? If you just give them a little, they'll add a lot.
Don't take everything. I've just found players just give too much. And there comes a point where you're trying to run a game. They've got to manage something other than just arranging how many arrows or bullets or how much bullets weigh. They need to kind of handle their own crap sometimes. So don't be afraid, as a game master, don't be afraid to just not use something. And if a player whines about it, either you've made a mistake and it was too important, or they drink the bitch juice Snapple and it's no
problem. Yeah, I agree with that. Don't feel
bitch
obligated.
Juice? Oh.
Well, yeah, well, bitch juice, of course. I mean, I figured that one without saying, but no, don't feel obligated to use any certain amount of backstory, because you're going to get players who give you different amounts of backstory even per character, from one character to the next. And especially if you're going into it with like a pre-published campaign or something, or even if like they decided on this is the narrative we want to tell, that should be your priority, and just ensure that the players are still having fun with it, and then sprinkle in the backstories when you can.
Okay, so tell everybody where they can find you. We'll start with Nick, and then Chad, and then Pedro.
The easiest way to keep up with me is to go to my website, nicholascorey.com. It has my blog. It has the other podcasts that I'm on, including Mythos Busters, the Arkham Horror podcast. And then also follow me on Twitter at Nicholas Corey.
I am a host on feartheboot.com. I also have a website called morningsky.com. That's SKYE. And that has a couple of my role-playing games I've published. And that's about it. I don't do social media, so you can't really follow me.
And I'm Pedro, the GM and creator of the World Walkers universe, where I do several different podcasts: World Walkers COG, and World Walkers the other ones. Each one's pretty different, but they all feature players as ridiculous as their characters. December 4th, World Walkers and World Walkers COG launch new seasons at the same time. So if you're interested, do that. Follow me, World Walkers Pod, at the appropriate social channels, and that's about it.
All right. Well, thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Nick, for hosting this episode. Thank you, Angry Cheese Toast, for the lead-in question.
Angry, so cheesy.
And Van City Dustin, thank you for the question. And then Young One 2, thank you for the AMA question. Gage, again, a little bit of Savage Worlds this time, but just the tip. And thank you everybody for watching, and we will see you again next week, and watch the final credits to find out who the hosts will be next week.
Ooh, I gotta find out.
Yeah.
Is it me?
All right, thank you everybody.